Hey there, Banditos. Welcome to yet another Wednesday episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits on this Wednesday, October 19th. I am Joe Marcello.
I'm Warren Phillips.
And our buddy Mike cannot be with us today, but you are in for a treat. You have the OG Bandits. That's right. Joe and Orrin are here to welcome you to the Wednesday bliss that is Comic Book Day. And we're bringing you a great interview today. This is with a fantastic artist, one who I was a fan of and not even aware of it because I'm terrible with names. We're talking about none other than Tom Mandrake. I was a fan of his work, specifically on Martian Manhunter and Spectre. Fantastic artwork. Loved it, loved it, loved it. I think probably one of the best artists for Spectre that I've ever seen. The eyes are absolutely haunting. And the interview that you guys did was absolutely fantastic.
Well, thank you. So, yeah, when Tom Mandrake emailed me back and said, "Sure, I'll come on," it was one of those. Wait, oh, he really said yes. I gotta really buckle down here. Fascinating guy, a wonderful guy. Like you said, Joe, his art is hauntingly beautiful. Uh, Going even back to his early work in DC and Marvel, and you see the evolution of his art to where it is now. It's again one of those artists where you see his work and you know exactly who did it, and I think that's such a rarity in the comic book world. So, without further ado, our interview with the great Tom Mandrake.
Well, thanks very much for having me.
So it's a great pleasure talking to you. We're going to start the way we do with all of our questions, and that is, how did you discover comics?
Well, my dad was a comic book fan. So I was lucky in that respect. The comics were always right there. He liked comic books and he liked pulp magazines. You see right over this shoulder over here. There's still some of his pulp magazines are right there over my shoulder. And when I was a little kid, my dad and I would have arguments over who was better, Captain America or Captain Marvel. So I was lucky that we'd go to the newsstand and he would buy me comic books. So it was just part of a natural process for me to be involved in the whole thing. Horror movies, old radio shows, comic books, it was part of our life.
We usually ask as a follow-up, whether you have any of your original purchases, but you will have what your dad showed you, the pulp magazines, which is it's pretty amazing. You hung on to them.
Almost afraid sometimes to pick them up because, especially the pulp magazines. Now, these that I have right here in the studio with me are in pretty good shape, but I have other ones, some beautiful old issues with Virgil Finlay illustrations in them that are powdery. Pulp magazines don't wear well. And those 1940 editions are getting so brittle. I like to show them to my kids too, but every time you turn the page, they deteriorate even more.
Gee whiz. Well, one of your stops in your comic journey was with First Comics. And how did you get in there, and how did that experience help you as an artist?
So First Comics, yeah. So I was working on Grimjack with John Ostrander at first, and that was after I was working on Batman. I finished up a run on Batman. I think I did 12 issues there, and I was friends with John and Kim Yale. And as I was coming off Batman, John was like, "Hey, why don't you do some Grimjack? That would be fun." And I was like, "Yeah, that would be fun." And I ended up staying on the book for a long time. I think I had the longest run in that book of anybody, including Tim Truman, who was the one of the creators along with John. And we were, left to our own devices. First was the kind of company that was like, "You guys do what you want to do and have a great time." And we did. John is a great creator. And as you know, John and I did a ton of work together. We did Grimjack, and then we did Firestorm, and we did the Spectre, and Martian Manhunter, and just a couple of years ago, we did a creator-owned book called Cross Hallowed Ground. So years and years of working together. But I think that the freedom that we had to work on Grimjack gave me the opportunity to really explore my style.
As let's say, when you mentioned freedom, as an artist, how important was it for you to take that sort of detour into the independent scene where you can explore your own creative, ideas and stuff like that?
For me, it's very important. Early on when I was going to the Kubert School, one of the things that Joe Kubert always said to me was, you have to pencil and ink your own stuff. Joe always penciled it, inked his own things. Very rarely did he ever work on anybody else's stuff after a certain point in his career. At the same time, when I first started out, I also had a very good relationship with Dick Giordano, who at that time in the early 80s was, I think, publisher or editor-in-chief. I can't remember what his title was at DC. And he was pushing me, not heavily, but he wanted me to ink. Now, there was a lot of inking work available to me, both at Marvel and DC at the time. So, I think it was 81 or 82, I was inking the New Mutants, or actually finishing the New Mutants over layouts over Sal Buscema. And that avenue was definitely open to me. But Joe's voice still rings in my head. He's always right behind me, telling me what to do, even now. But penciling and inking has always been the thing that I wanted to do, and I always pushed for that. It was a bit of a struggle early on because companies are always looking to, maybe not so much now, but especially in the 80s, 90s, they're always looking to plug you in places where they need you. We need an inker here. We need a penciler there. There's more freedom now, but at that time, it would have been really easy for me to just go down that path, be a penciler or be an inker. But I was determined. I worked hard at, and I think I was lucky that Len Wein, who was my editor on Batman, and Dick Giordano gave me that shot on Batman at that time. I got the pencil and ink the book for a year. That was awesome. And after that, I jumped over to working for First with John. Those were both great opportunities. Some people question that idea of leaving, a book like Batman and going to First. I think it was the right thing to do. Well, there's no doubt about it at this point. It worked out fine for me.
So far, so good.
Yeah.
Agreed. So I wanted to back up to a little point you mentioned around you're doing the inks or the finishing inks over Sal Buscema on New Mutants. It seems to me that that's kind of this great transitionary process between inking and penciling, because from what I can understand, you have more loose layouts when you're doing the finishing ink, and you have a little bit more control. Did you see it that way when you were in the midst of it, that you were sort of on your way to moving from an inker to a penciler?
That was one of those rare jobs for me where, and this is really early in my career. Again, it was a great opportunity. When I got the job, I was asked to try and imitate another inker style. In that case, it was Bob Layton. He was the guy that was doing the job before I was. And they asked me if I could work like that early in my career. I'm like, yes, I want the work. I'll do it. So it was very loose pencils by Sal. So I had to go in and finish off the buildings and things in pencil, and then go in and do as much as possible ink like Bob. And it worked out well enough. It was a very different look for me. If you look at that job and anything else I was doing at the time, it's definitely a stylistic departure for me. But that's good, trying something different like that. That was a real opening for me at Marvel. It was a great opportunity for me, and I'm glad that I took it. But yeah, it was a really interesting job. And boy, I remember sales in that. If you think about this now, we were way up into 200s, 250, 225, 225,000 copies. And yeah, they got fired because the sales weren't good enough. but that was the period of time.
A different world.
Sure.
And you moved on to, you also worked on Sergeant Rock for a while, and doing sort of war books that are a little bit based on, reality of soldiers' experiences. Was it sort of limiting artistically to branch out to something more that you maybe wanted to do, or had to stay focused on more realistic based images?
So the short war stories that I was doing for the backups in Sergeant Rock. Let me back up a little bit there. So the Kubert School, when I went there, was a 2-year school. I was in the second graduating class, and we were pretty raw when we got out of there. We were the last of the second year of the 2-year classes. After that, it became a 3-year school. And that was good because coming out of there after 2 years, we needed a third year. And while we were working, me and several of the other graduates, we were working on those backups. We were under a very heavy thumb of Joe. He would give us those scripts and really, really heavy editorial work. And if you look at them, I have some of the originals here, and I've never given these away because I'd go in and, okay, here's the pencils, and he'd be like, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. Take it back, fix it, bring it back. Okay, that's a little bit better, but fix this, fix this, fix this. Then when I would finally get it up to his standards, he'd go back in and re-ink about like every face on it, which at the time I was like, oh, I must be terrible at this. But it was a wonderful learning experience. So I consider the year or two that I spent working on those backups to be my third year of the Kubert School. And now I've got these great pages of my very raw stuff with these wonderful Joe Kubert faces that are all inked right over top of it. So that's how I see that work.
Were war books anything that you were interested in doing, or that you like more the superhero fantasy sort of aspects?
I've always been interested in all genres of comics. To me, it's always about the storytelling. You can dress comic book characters up in any kind of clothes that you want. It's still the storytelling. I like war stories and cowboys and horror and superheroes, and you become known for certain things. Without a doubt, in my career, I sort of landed on the supernatural superhero thing. That's what people know me for. That's awesome. I love that I'm known for anything. That's great. But I didn't choose that necessarily. It's what people like the best. The Spectre series that I did is the thing that I became the most known for. I love that. But I'm perfectly happy to do a Western or the only thing I don't think that I've ever done, let me think about this for a minute. I don't think I've ever done a romance comic, but I'd be perfectly happy to do that if the opportunity arose, just to see what it would feel like.
I'm wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about how does backup stories work? How are the artists chosen, and who assigns you what from that?
So I'm going to speak to this, let's say back in the 80s. So at that time, there was a group of editors at DC that were interested in helping out some of the students who were coming out of the Kubert School. So yeah, Joe, who was working on the, so there was the horror comics, I think it was Jack Harris. Len Wein was there. And so they were feeding us work and helping us learn. I want to say Marv Wolfman, but I'm not sure that he was an editor at that time. Maybe there were a few other guys. So there was an interest on their part. They could see how bad we wanted the work. And we used to go up, talk about a different time. You could go up to DC or Marvel and sit in the lobby. And as people went by, I'd say, have you got any work? Is there anything I can do for you? Some of the earliest work I had at the time was doing backgrounds on a Supergirl strip that I believe Carmine Infantino, it was Carmine. He was penciling a Supergirl strip. So just by hanging around the lobby and constantly like, hey, I'm looking for something. You got anything? Got anything? And I finally nailed down a fairly regular gig doing the backgrounds on the Supergirl strip. Actually, I still have the pay stub for that up on my wall here to remind myself of what it was. $8 a page to do the backgrounds on those Supergirls. But it's always good to remember, you know, when you want work, you'll do anything that you have to. I feel like I just drifted away from what you were asking me. But at any rate, so first, I think you have to have editors who are interested in helping young talent. And I see that happening now at Dynamite. So now I see a very similar process happening. A lot of, well, I won't say a lot, several students as they're coming out of the Kubert School are getting work from Dynamite backups and things because Dynamite seems to want to help new students. So you need that enthusiasm from people in editorial to say, we have to help new people. But the same thing is really happening with DC. You know, at the beginning of this summer, the Kubert School and DC joined together to do this milestone initiative thing. I don't know if you heard about that or not, but I was involved in that as the instructor for the artists on the milestone initiative. So that was a great thing too, because they went through this huge process of looking at all these artists and writers from all over the United States, and they picked out 12 artists and 12 writers. And boy, these artists and writers, they really wanted it. And it was just a wonderful process. And I think we had 12 weeks to go through a process of teaching them. And then they got scripts, and we all came to California and got together. It's tremendous. So DC still has, I think, that fire. But there were some young editors there who were really involved in making this work.
So skipping around a little bit, although you just mentioned DC, and I wanted to go back to, you know, some of the work you did with on Batman, particularly with Doug Mensch and introducing a couple villains. How difficult is it with such an established rogues gallery such as Batman's to, you know, introduce a new villain that would stick? Of course, you didn't know it would stick, but I'm specifically talking about Black Mask. You know, what was that experience like? And is it sort of a daunting task to try to introduce a new Batman villain?
It was such a shot out of the dark. You know, the first issue that I did on Batman, and I was on top of the world, you know. That was, I think, 1985. And I found out, I guess it was Dick Giordano who told me, I can't remember if I first talked to Dick or Len, who was the editor, that they were going to let me try out for Batman. And then I got the book and signed a contract for a year. It was like, oh, this is awesome. And then we're going to create a new villain. And my first reaction, I'll never forget this, was I think I mentioned this to Jan, and one of my best friends at the time was like, oh, I really want to do the Joker. and Doug said, no, this is good. We're going to create a new villain. And so, all right, we'll do that. That sounds good. I had no idea that of all characters, that the Black Mask, my first Batman story, my first Batman villain, would take off and become one of the great Batman villains. I had no idea. But it's awesome that it happened. But you have no idea. You know, I've created other Batman villains, and some of them, well, none of the other ones ever stuck. You know, it's fine. But yeah, you go for it, and over the course of your career, you throw a lot of stuff at the wall and hope something sticks. And when it does, you're like, why that one and not this one? Who knows?
You're for Mike and I, such a dynamic artist, and one of our favorites as well. And I'm wondering, when did you find the confidence in your artistic style? Was there a point that you felt you belonged in the industry and that your vision for how things should look, you know, is syncing well with fans and the company as well?
That's always been an interesting question for me. And I remember talking to Andy Kubert about this, and we were co-teaching a narrative art class. This must have been, I don't know, 10 years ago. And just trying to figure that same thing out. When do you become comfortable with yourself? Early on, you have a sort of the bluster of youth. It's like, oh, I can do this. I'm good at this. But the reality is somewhere deep inside, you're like, there's somebody in the back of your head going, you're terrible. You don't know what you're doing, and that is to some extent true. You really haven't really got it figured out. And somewhere 5-10 years into my career, I sort of settled into what I was doing and said, I think I know what I'm doing now. It was somewhere during Firestorm, which there are fans who really like what I was doing Firestorm, but in retrospect, when I look at that artwork, I'm like, this is where I suddenly figured out what it was I wanted to accomplish. I'm not saying that work I did before that wasn't good, because there are high points and low points and experimental points before that, and stuff that I look at and go, wow, I really hit the nail on the head that time, or, well, that was, a near miss there. But by the time that I got through Firestorm and we started on Spectre, that's when I sort of blossomed as an artist and felt the confidence that I was really looking for. So that would be about 10 years into my career. And when I talked to Andy about that, he was like, yeah, I feel it was about 10 years for me too. So some people never feel comfortable in their own skin in that regard, but and now I'm 40 plus years into it. I'm pretty comfortable now.
I should think so.
Once in a while you have a bad day, but that's artwork, because you're always trying to get better. And you can have whole issues or whole series where you put everything you got into it, and afterwards you go, all right, I didn't quite get where I wanted to on this, but that's okay. And other ones where you feel like you just nailed it all the way through. Whether or not the audience picks up on that, there's nothing you can do about that. Again, you produce work, and sometimes it hits and sometimes it doesn't. Does that mean it's good or bad work? I don't think it does. I think the flow of the reaction of the audience has a lot to do with just the period of time that you're in, and you have no control over that.
You mentioned the Spectre, of course, and such a dynamic series, and it hooked me in immediately. At what point, visually and mentally, did you come up with what you wanted the Spectre to look like, how you wanted the feel of the book visually to be, to connect with John's words?
The fact that John and I had spent, what was it, 30 plus, if not more, issues on Grimjack, and was it 12 issues on Firestorm? I forget. I think it was. So all that time that we put into that meant that I felt like we hit the ground running on the Spectre. So there's a big difference. On Firestorm, DC asked me if I wanted to do that. So that wasn't like I said, hey, let's do Firestorm. I was like, Dan Rasper asked me if I wanted to. It was like, yeah, let's do that. That sounds like fun. But John and I were sitting around saying, hey, what do you want to do next? Nobody's interested in the Spectre. Let's take that, because nobody cares about that character. And we were lucky that Rasper was in our corner, because he fought for that for us. Because DC was like, nah, nobody cares about the Spectre. We don't want to do that. And we're like, we really want to do it. Let us do it. And they're like, yeah, fine, go ahead. And it turned out to be the right thing. Actually, it was the same thing we did with the Martian Manhunter. When we had a planned ending for the Spectre, which I think is clear if you read through that whole thing. We knew where we were going with that. We had a planned ending. And when we were wrapping it up, it's like, what do you want to do? Well, and we were like, well, nobody's interested in the Martian Manhunter. Let's take that, because we can do what we want with that too. Weird, right? These two are great characters, but when we picked them out, nobody was interested in them. So we got to do exactly what we wanted with them.
Do you think, because I thought your drawings captured the sort of the horror aspects, but also sort of this feeling of madness going on in the Spectre with what was going on with him, with the other characters. Um, did you feel like that was you had hit all the points that you wanted to artistically with that book? That this was sort of not a coming out party, but this was you showing, what you wanted to do.
Yeah, absolutely. That was it was a wonderful opportunity to play this game, and we really enjoyed what can we do, because it was straight DC Comics. It wasn't. It was Comics Code Comics. We weren't playing in the, what was it at the time, where you had DC Comics and you had the Karen Berger's line of comics.
Impact?
Vertigo.
Vertigo, right. So we had to deal with Comics Code, and we were always curious to see what can we do in the Spectre to make it as much horror as possible and still get away with it. So that was, when you have parameters, it always makes it more interesting. I think parameters make artwork more interesting. I say artwork in a general sense, writing and drawing, whatever field you happen to be in. It's the parameters that you work in that make you more creative, and that's I think one of the things that made the Spectre really work.
I mean, right there, issue number 1, it's a skull made out of skeletons with him in the front. I mean, that's right there. That doesn't draw you in, or that doesn't sort of set a statement right there of how this is going to go. This is not the Spectre from the 70s and 80s, popping into the JLA sometimes. This is going to be a much darker and deeper look at the character.
And I think we might have even been a little bit lost if we'd made it a Vertigo book too, because there were old comic fans, just straight DC fans who were really into that. I think they were just dying to see that character, blossom as much as he could. Certainly, the Fleischer issues, there were only 6. I think there were 6 of them. Maybe there were more that Jim Aparo did. I'm a big Jim Aparo fan. And that was something that when I saw those, they're like, oh, this is something that needs to be explored, but even more. So I feel that we were, to some extent, bouncing off that a little bit, but still doing our own thing. So I think that the fans who love the Spectre really were just waiting for that to happen.
In your opinion, or in your mind, could you describe the Spectre to us of who he is and what he represents for you personally?
Well, I think going back to that idea of working within parameters, the interesting thing about the character is that he is a character of unlimited power, only limited by his ability to perceive what he has. So what's interesting about Jim Corrigan and what we played with the whole time was he could have used that power any way he wanted, but he's always stuck in his upbringing, in his ability to perceive what he had. And we saw that, we explored that several times when the Spectre Force got away from him, or when the Joker took the Spectre Force away from him. And anytime that kind of thing would happen, you could see what could happen with that power and why it was smart of whatever power gave that to him. It recognized that he's the right kind of vessel to have that power because he limits it, because he's such a moral person.
I wanted to tease out a couple points that I found interesting in the last few questions. One was this idea of parameters and constraints, which I think I hear a lot in filmmaking. When you talk about directors that are constrained early in their career by budget, mostly, and they get creative. I'm thinking right now, because I just heard a little bit of a career retrospective on Sam Raimi, and making those Evil Dead movies. I mean, the lengths he had to go to problem solve on the fly with the amount of money he had and the resources he had is just amazing. And sometimes I think when you have everything you could possibly have, that becomes a problem because you're no longer doing that kind of on the fly creative problem solving. So that must have been, fulfilling, probably in retrospect. At the time, you may have wanted to say, I'd like the open sky, but.
Well, as I say, I think we were having more fun. This is just, I think, the way John and I work. We were having as much fun bouncing off of those walls and seeing what we could get away with, because we'd come up with ideas and then say, well, first to Dan, and then Pete Tomasi took over as editor at some point in the series. I forget which issue he became the editor on. And then it was like, well, we want to do this. Can we get away with this? And of course, he'd be the one that'd have to go in and deal with the whoever was over him or the comics code itself. And I think we kind of enjoyed playing everybody against each other that way. Not that there was ever any real battle. You kind of know where the limits are, and you push a little bit to get there. And when you look at that series, I'm amazed at what they let us do, considering there was a comics code at the time. Although realistically, I think we knocked down some walls in terms of blood, gore, violence, implied sexual innuendo there that they were doing in Vertigo. You look at the stuff we did in the Spectre. After that, it seems like we just took care of that. We knocked that down, and then anybody could do anything after that.
Yeah, you established a precedent that anyone could look at and say, "Well, Spectre did it. We might as well have the opportunity." That plays into the other point that I picked up along the way, which is something we've heard again and again, which is pick a character, or if you have the opportunity, pick a character or team that is underappreciated, where then you have the opportunity to use all of your creative powers to redefine them.
Right.
And so, I think it's very interesting that, you and John picked the Spectre and then picked Martian Manhunter. I mean, great characters to redefine or define, really, in some cases.
It's the same reason that when we were looking for a golden age character to kill off, we picked Mr. Terrific, because at that time, nobody cared about Mr. Terrific and his extremely weird costume, that strange fair play costume. So we killed him off. This is long before people were turning characters into zombies. So we killed him off, turned him into a zombie for an issue, and brought back the new Mr. Terrific. And he launched very successfully into the new DCU.
Yeah, that was actually my next question about that character. I thought it was a extremely successful launch, and part of, well, like any character, it's partially the character, the backstory, but also the design. How much time did you take to get that design? Because I think it's really striking, and part of what made the character successful was that big black tee, and
we thought a lot about that. First, the whole idea of bringing back, I don't know quite how to describe Mr. Terrific, the blandest, whitest white guy in the world. The original Mr. Terrific was just sort of devoid of ideas. There were so many millionaire white playboy characters. And we thought, well, what if we just pulled the rug out of that idea and brought it back as different as we possibly could, and that meant that the uniform had to be as strikingly different as possible. So yeah, I went through a lot of sketches on that one, come up with that idea. Maybe less than I could have, because John and I talked it out. It's like, he just can't. Initially, he can't have too much of a costume. It's got to be pretty simple. He's got to be straightforward. He's got to be just, I don't want to say a regular guy, but a very straightforward person. We wanted to create an African-American character out of him. So yeah, that worked out. But I'm glad we made that choice. I'm glad we made all those choices.
Yeah, I really think it's one of the better designs of the past couple decades in terms of rejuvenating a character. So kudos.
20 years later, you can say, yeah, that was a good idea.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure in the moment you're like, is this going to work?
Yeah, that's for sure.
I wanted to also move on to Martian Manhunter, which was one of my favorite runs. I actually was introduced to Martian Manhunter before I had to go back and realize that you had done the Spectre, which I guess you're definitely more known for. But I just really liked what you were doing in that book. And again, sort of below the radar character. I mean, certainly, part of the Justice League, very powerful, but not really, hadn't been delved into, hadn't been like plumbed the depths of what that character could be. How quickly did you and John sort of land on the tone of that book? Because it's a different book than Spectre, very much. It's not a horror, and in fact, there are a lot of moments of levity. One of my most favorite covers and just ideas was the sort of Oreo fetish that he had. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how that all came about.
Well, yeah. So as I said before, the first thing was, let's find another interesting character that is not popular in the DCU, and we started thinking about it. And the idea that the Martian Manhunter, at first, he never had his own book, right? He never had his own series. I can't speak to the Golden Age. I'm not sure if he ever had his own series back then, but I don't think he did. I think he was always a backup. So same deal. Pete Tomasi was going to be our editor on that, and he went to bat for us on it. And then, of course, we started talking about the tone that we wanted, and this was going to be our opportunity to do something. For me, it was going to be an opportunity to do something big and visual, and really open up with that kind of sci-fi kind of thing. And John's could morph and turn into all these different kinds of things. And John, as a writer, has, I think, a tremendous ability to write humor as well as pathos. And John can write anything, really, which I think he proved way back in Grimjack as well. Because to me, there's a lot of really interesting, fun moments of humor in Grimjack as well. So we wanted to explore a very different kind of character, but also have this opportunity because the Martian Manhunter has tremendous power as well. He's a tremendously powerful character. But the thing that we right away we thought, what is this thing with fire? This is stupid. This doesn't make any sense. Why is he allergic to fire? So that was the thing that John, I think, was really interested in. How can he make that something that sounds real? And so it became a psychological element, that he explored that idea of the reason that John Johns has an issue with fire is it's a psychological thing. So yeah, and there's a lot of fun elements in it. And one of my favorite covers was the one with Plastic Man coming wrapping around it. But I do love that Oreo one too. I've still got that one. I don't know that I'll ever get rid of that. That one took forever drawing all those Oreos on it.
Did you stop eating Oreos for a time after that?
I don't eat Oreos, but it's not because of that. It's I like them too much. You start eating Oreos and you can't finish. You can't stop.
Yeah, they're like Pringles.
So yeah, actually, and I wrote one of those issues too, which is I've always wanted to do more writing. I'm always busy drawing, but I did get to write one of those issues as well, which was fun.
I'm wondering you've had some really nice long runs on a variety of different books. And it seems like in today's industry, long runs on books are not something that is very either chic or people just don't want to do. If you had your choice, would you rather jump to a whole bunch of different books and try different things, or like you did, have a nice long run on a book so you could sort of establish the character and really put your mark on it?
Well, I've certainly proven my ability to do long runs and things. And I've done a bunch of short series. So I did a short series of Swamp Thing 8-pagers with Phil Hester. That was really fun. And there's a real challenge to doing short stories. To me, it's like a great writer who can write a really great short story. That's a talent in and of itself. And I did a little short story with Len. It was, and one with Marv. These little 8-pagers, 10-pagers, 12 pages. I find that to be an interesting challenge. I think I'm more interested in those because I've done so many long runs on things. The format that I'm finding interesting right now is just going right to graphic novels, rather than doing things in issues. I just finished a graphic novel. I can't tell you what it is because they haven't announced it yet, but it was with Steve Niles. I'll say that much about it. And I'm writing and drawing one of my own. It's just straight to graphic novel format. So that's kind of the one thing that I haven't done a ton of, where you just dive right into the graphic novel format. And I think that's the thing that interests me most right now. So in terms of storytelling, each format has its own peculiarities. I've certainly done enough 20 to 24 page stories and long runs on series. Short stories, I love short stories. But this business of diving into like, here's 80 pages or 120 pages, go do it. That's kind of got my interest right now. I just did one, and now I'm in the middle of another one, and I've got a third one lined up, and that's been my whole summer right now. Well, aside from a couple of short stories that are going to come out, I did a JSA short story. It's going to be a Halloween publication, and I did one for Storm King. You guys know Storm King, John Carpenter stuff. They're pretty comics. So I did another Halloween story for them. So I seem to be bouncing back and forth between like 15 pages and 120 pages. It's like that's kind of where I am right now.
You did a great limited series, and maybe this sort of turned you on to the format, even though it was, I think, separate issues and then combined, with J. Michael Straczynski, called Sidekick.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm curious because he's, as in J. Michael, seems to be a very specific writer. What that experience was like for you, as compared to maybe other writers, maybe John. Did he have very full scripts? And how did the project even come about?
So with John and I always work plot style. So when I'm working with John, it's like we would get together. Hey, let's do this. That sounds like fun. Here's a plot. I'll do the pencils. John will do the dialogue. So with Straczynski, he got in touch with me and said, I've got this series. You want to do it? He just came out. It was out of the blue. It was like, and I was like, yeah, sure. That sounds like fun. And then the scripts started coming in, and they were really good, but they were finished scripts. Mm-hmm. And he's always got like a million things going on. So I finished the pencils in the first one, and I turned him in, and he's like, yeah, that's great. Go ahead and ink it. Okay. And there was never not a lot of interaction, but he was digging it the whole time. We got together at a convention after 3 or 4 of them were done, and he was very effusive about the work, and I was having a great time. I thought it was a great story. So I was having fun. He was liking it. We were going to do a second 12-issue run, and then on his end, he got too busy. Again, he's got like a billion things he's always doing. So we ended up not doing the next 12 issues. So I was a little disappointed about that, but there were other things to do. So there you go. So it was a very different process than working with John because, like I say, Jam's always doing 1,000 things, but good. It was good thing. It was good work. Good work while it lasted.
Yeah. I mean, did you do enough of it to say whether you prefer one or the other, or is it just depends on the story? If it's a good story, it sort of doesn't matter, or maybe it's format, driven.
I'm comfortable doing it either way, with this caveat: if it's a badly written script, it drives me out of my mind. but he writes a great script. So there were very few times where I was like, all right, the storytelling's not working here. But when I changed it, he was like, yeah, that's great. That's even better. So it was fine. And I've rarely run into a writer where if I make a change in a, a script where they won't appreciate the fact that I made the change. So I feel like that's part of my job. If I'm working on a full script and I see a better way to do it, I'm going to make the change. And with rare exception, in fact, I can't even think of any examples off the top of my head. I haven't had anybody come back and say, well, you ruined it. So I feel like I'm a good enough storyteller that I know where the beats are off, you know?
You just do it and ask for forgiveness later.
Yeah.
If you even get to that point, you have to ask for
If
forgiveness.
it's going to be that big of a problem, they'll let me know.
Exactly.
Is there a character or a book that you wish you had an opportunity to take a crack at that you haven't gotten to yet?
I at one time I would have said Doctor Strange, but he's so high profile now that I kind of don't want to do it anymore. But there was a time when I was dying to do Doctor Strange, and now now that he's been in the movies so much, it's kind of like you would have to sort of tell a certain line, and I'd rather do my own thing with it. So rather than do Doctor Strange, I would rather just do my own thing, my own magic users.
Makes sense.
So other than that, it's always fun to dive into. You know, I was always a big Marvel fan, always a big DC fan. They've got great characters. Dr. Fate's a great character. I've done Dr. Fate as a side character in several series, so he'd be fun to do as a main character.
There's something about capes.
So I would love capes.
Spectre, Martian Manhunter, the two you just mentioned, Doctor Strange, yeah, Doctor Fate.
Cape.
A good cape is a great thing.
Cool. It's a great graphic tool to use.
Yeah.
You mentioned some projects you have coming up, some you can't talk about, some that are in the process of being worked on now. Any other things that fans can be looking forward to in the upcoming future?
Well, if there was in about let's see, 2 months, there's going to be, let's see, 1, 2, 3. I think about 3 projects that are going to be announced around me, and yeah, we've got 3 different creator-owned projects going to be coming up, but I have to stay true to the publisher, which I always do. You know, I never want to jump out in front of anybody. So there's going to be one series and 2 graphic novels that are coming up. So I can't say much more than that right now.
Okay.
But that's what I've been spending my summer doing, is the 2 graphic novels in this series that I'm working on. All different. I'll say that they're all horror related in one genre or another.
And we're back. I love this interview, guys. You did a great job. You know, there's something I really enjoyed about his career, and is just he has, you know, he's one of these artists or comic book creators that really has some long runs on titles. And again, by today's standards, you don't see that too frequently, but he had extensive runs on, as we said, Spectre, Batman, Detective Comics, Firestorm, I believe he did some work on as well. But great work and really interesting career.
And that career keeps going, folks. The project he's doing with J.M. DeMatteis, he's the artist on these new books coming out. Information about it's trickling out, so please check social media, check websites for this new project he's doing. I'm sure it's going to be absolutely wonderful, and Tom's an absolutely wonderful guy too. So a great time all around. And thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for checking us out again. Please, as Mike always says, like, rate, subscribe, tell your friends. Let's get the word out there about the Dollar Bin Bandits. Have a wonderful day, everyone.